Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about startup communities. So startup communities are actually, a really integral part of, creating more entrepreneurship and creating new businesses. The truth is that, in the same way that it takes a village to raise a child, well, if you really want to see an increase in startup activity within your city, within your economy, then usually that startup activity doesn't just happen entirely spontaneous, but it is a result of somebody helping to organize and promote working startup communities. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what startup communities are, and a little bit about the different flavors of startup communities that can exist. Jose, you've been to Korea and Boston, a few times. What would you say, in your opinion, have been the similarities and the differences between the startup communities here and there?
Okay. Well, first of all, size. Of course, Seoul is a huge city compared to Boston, and um, the especially the startup ecosystem that I frequent is around MIT, which is a relatively small area. You can walk to most places. And in Seoul, it can take you 1 hour or more to get from one side of the city to the other. So huge difference right there. And there's pros and cons. Of course, there's a huge potential ecosystem as well in Seoul. In Boston, it's just going to be smaller, but maybe more concentrated. And then there is, I think, huge effort on both cities to promote startup and startup communities in different ways. I think maybe in Boston it happens. There's so much history behind it that it has evolved over the years, and Seoul is let's call it a newer innovation or startup ecosystem, relatively speaking. Big differences. Similarities as in terms of both Seoul and Boston are two very educated populations, high tech, biotech, so many similar interests. So maybe we could spend a whole hour comparing the two. But certainly the Boston has shown its potential, and I think Seoul has, as we had discussed last year during our visit with some of our guests from Harvard, saying how the not my words, but words from our friend Ramon Sanchez, that he thinks Seoul could be the next Silicon Valley given the potential that's there.
Right. What's interesting about what you mentioned, I think, is that I think historically the two cities also have very, very different histories. So Boston itself, as a city, was the result of a very entrepreneurial endeavor, right? You had people from the United Kingdom who wanted to start their own thing, and they traveled across the ocean and they went and they started a new city. And I think that, in a certain sense, there's been this long running thread of like entrepreneurial uh, thinking, and entrepreneurial actions that you see in Boston from fisheries, going back quite a bit of time. And then the genesis of the modern Korean economy, of course, happens after World War II, and it was largely government driven. In fact, interesting topic for another time is that in Korea there were a lot of laws specifically against entrepreneurship. Um, for example, you couldn't, your taxes were higher if you produced low volumes of beer, and the justification for that was that too much competition was a bad thing. Like literally, to avoid excessive competition, we're not going to allow small batch beer making. So for the longest time, you just had the equivalent of Bud Light times three.
Mm.
And those laws were removed about 5 years ago. And there's been an explosion in Korea of craft breweries.
But was that applicable to the alcoholic beverage field, or did that apply to other areas as well?
I mean, it applied to a lot of other areas. That's one specific example where there was specifically a higher tax on beer production if it happened in small batches.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
yes, there are probably, that's why I said, let's this is a conversation that could be a lot longer and we could talk about it later.
Yeah.
And it's really been the last five, 10-ish years, but definitely in the last five, where a lot of changes happened that have been very dramatic in the laws, that have allowed many more entrepreneurs to start setting up, and start operating their companies. There's still a tension around that. A very big ride sharing company was recently made illegal. It was operating in the gray area. There was a lot of hearings. They were found by the court to be in the clear. And then the Congress, the Assembly, the equivalent of the US Congress, the Assembly came in a week after that ruling and passed a law that made them illegal. So there's still that tension. So Semin, we've got a brief presentation talking a little bit more about what startup communities are. Can you walk us through the first one or two slides?
Yeah. So this came from the book from Brad Feld. I think he is one of the mentors, founding members of Techstars, right?
Yeah.
So he mentioned on 3 points of startup communities. One is improving access to entrepreneurship education, which means that entrepreneurs should have very easy access to like the methodology or how to build your own startup. That's like the first thing you can do to build communities. And the second part was multiplying connections among entrepreneurs and mentors. So it's not only having good enough resources and educational materials, you actually have to have mentors who can actually guide and help them through the process. And number 3 is creating events and activities that can activate all the participants in the startup community. What this means is, well, people have to get together. They have to, see each other, meet each other. This was a little bit, this became a little bit hard because everyone is now online, but I really like what Jose said, right? It's not social distancing, it's like physical distancing. So you can still meet online like we're doing right now, like some of the coffee breaks we're doing. But this is really important because meetings are great. You can set up meetings to do business, but not everything comes when you have like a set agenda for a meeting. So while you're talking about these interesting topics, while you're talking about your business, while you're listening to other business, you get ideas, you get inspiration, and you also get to learn their experience of how they go through their entrepreneurial journey.
Right. And to follow on that point about what happens when we had that legal system that doesn't allow entrepreneurship. What we had been seeing here in Korea for a long time is that Korean entrepreneurs actually contribute to a lot of economies around the world. And one big driver for entrepreneurs to set up their companies in the United States, in Europe, and places other than Korea was that as soon as they started getting involved in building these startup communities, they would start learning about what it takes to start a company. They would realize the company I want to run is illegal, and that's what would drive them out. And this had been a challenge for quite some time to build communities here in Korea, which was that there was this very quick exit from the local ecosystem, and it interrupted this this kind of a creation of, you educate entrepreneurs, they become successful, and then they become the mentors for the next round, right? And so when you have a very large exit rate of the now educated, now productive entrepreneurs into other economies out of a lack of opportunity, this was really limiting that creation here.
Right. And another part was, I think, a part of shame, which comes into if I fail,
Right.
I don't think, in Korea, there's a little bit too much of that. If you succeed, like, you're great, everyone looks up to you. But if you, on the other hand, if you go belly up, they tend to consider it as a shame rather than an experience that you can share with others. So I think that's like a missing part into these ecosystem and communities here in Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question in terms of culturally, a workplace culture. Something that happens here quite a bit is you will have events that are planned around team building that may involve some kind of physical, challenge, obstacle course, something like that. And you have situations where people have to rely on a team member to help them climb a wall because otherwise they can't do it on their own. And those are, they're a lot of fun. But I was wondering if is there such a is there that type of setup in Korea that you're aware of? I excuse my ignorance. I'm just trying to relate, kind of see if there's something analogous to that.
I mean, I don't think they're as much, but to be honest, we have tried those kind of activities ourselves, right? But I think those tend to be very effective, but no, not as much I see in the US, or almost not at all doing physical team building or physical bonding. They're all more on, hey, what's your idea? What do you do? Should we team up and then sit down and work on a computer or on a paper? Those kind of team buildings are more obvious here. So I mean,
yeah, and so you have this situation where you're trying to create community, and these events kind of maybe help do that, but also even just general big events that bring people together. And we're having a difficult time, of course, right now with this, because I think we all gravitate to a specific, we tend to have our interests, right? And we have our different age groups. We have our, what school we went to, what friends we hang out with. Like, for example, there's all these, serendipitous situations that may happen because you happen to be in a place with 500 people. And all of a sudden you kind of connect with a specific person because of maybe, they went to a lecture and so did you, because you have a similar, kind of interest. I think that's a big challenge right now. And so I think that's another thing that people try to do when they have these team building activities in a different setting, like let's say in an athletic setting where it's not the usual. And so people have to kind of put themselves in a different setting that they normally are. And somehow then you start making kind of new connections because of that new setting. And I think we're going to have a challenge in a situation where we are limited in the events that we can attend as entrepreneurs, and online conversations just are not as spontaneous, right? They have to be scheduled on Zoom.
Right.
And only one, I think maximum 2 people can talk at the same time, more or less. So yeah, I think that is definitely a challenge. So I mean, going through that topic, actually, Brad Feld mentions in his book about the culture itself as well. So I think expanding on the idea where we need to have a different setting will definitely help the community. There are also some key points that he mentioned where entrepreneurs have to lead the startup community. That's one thing that is really important, where the entrepreneurs, lead what they need to, support as a community, rather than someone else telling you, hey, you need this or that. Giving first. Don't wait until you got plenty of things from the community until you give back. Always take a long-term approach, rather than I'm coming into this meetup or this community just because I need to get 10 customers by this month. That doesn't work, obviously. Also needs to be inclusive, where it's open to everyone and anyone who wants to join and support the community. And focusing on building a business. Mario, I think you can address this part.
Yeah, so I think that that first point of entrepreneurs leading the startup community, Jose, would be One of the big differences that up to now has been very salient for me between Boston and Seoul. In Boston, a lot of the programming is led by the entrepreneurs themselves. You know, if you look at the MIT 100K, it's the MBA students that organize everything, right? From year to year, they
Mm.
pass the torch on to like the next MBA class to organize everything. And a lot of the professors are taking, you know, like a secondary role to support, to provide mentorship. And what we see here in Korea is that a lot of the programming happening inside of the universities, rather than being from the students leading and organizing and executing, it actually comes from the government, who made a program that the university applied to, and following the guidelines of the government program, then you start to have, you know, a lot of the execution. And there are some pros and cons to that. The pros to that is that, of course, government resources come in right away, and government resources can, you know, they could definitely be significant, right? So the ability for these programs to scale in resourcing is very, very quick. On the downside, you can lose a lot of, you know, the ground level needs. Um, and I think that when it comes to definitely taking a long-term approach, government intervention can bring a very strong long-term approach. You know, there's certain programs that have been running for like 10 years persistently. And in fact, Korea's performance during the COVID crisis came as a result of, you know, government-led effort to create technologies and to create research centers around medical products, medical supplies. So you gain the ability to take a long-term approach. You don't get as much of an emphasis on inclusivity. I think that's definitely a weakness that we see here in Korea. Um, Society is very homogenous ethnically. Nevertheless, Korean society, even though you're ethnically homogenous, it's very diverse. You know, there's a lot of diversity in the way people think, the way people act, the things that they want to do. But when you have like a handful of strong players leading the ecosystem, you lose all of that diversity. And that's why you end up with, again, a lot of Korean entrepreneurs that don't get support for their particular ideas, and just end up leaving the country altogether. So that's, I think, you know, a slight difference in like the profile and the makeup for both of them. We've got, you know, two last slides, and one thing that I wanted to point out too, that I think is critical, is that there is, it's not exactly the same thing. And I think this can be whether you have a top-down community driven by the government or a bottom-up approach where it's like organic entrepreneurial communities. I think that it's important to make a distinction between, you know, startup communities versus innovation communities. So these are two graphics that we showed last time of the innovation ecosystem. And there is definitely a very, very big overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing. And what I would say that here in Korea, we probably have a much stronger innovation community. Korea is one of the top countries in the world producing patents, for example. Um, and Korea has the within the top 5 economies in the world for their diversity in exports. So
Mhm.
innovation is very strong in Korea. Innovation communities are very, very strong in Korea. However, not yet very entrepreneurial. It's growing, it's changing very dramatically. And you know, Jose, we could probably say, what would you say, to what extent is there an overlap, or is there a distinction over at MIT between the startup communities versus the innovation communities?
Well, innovation can happen anywhere. Innovation can happen within a corporation, and there's lots of interest in that. Actually, there's so many seminars and certificate programs on innovation. Innovation leadership is like a big topic for professional education courses, because companies want to have innovation, and sometimes that can get lost when you are working in a large company. Things become slower, and there's a lot of processes that get built in, and you can argue that slows down innovation. So innovation can, of course, a startup should be based somewhat on innovation, I imagine, right? That's kind of a common theme. But innovation can happen less, in the diagram there on the right. Innovation can happen in the entrepreneurial setting and the university setting. In the government setting, there can be innovation. That's usually the slowest one, but it can be innovative. Corporate, of course, as I was talking about. And even when it comes to capital, there is innovation in terms of what the role of investors is in a company, and how they help potentially a corporation or a startup pivot. Even investors can be involved in some of the innovative decisions around the company's strategy or startup strategy. So yeah, what I think maybe we have to remember is that startups used to be called small businesses or something like that, and now everything's called a startup. But when you think about it, a lot of startups happened throughout history. Back to your point, Mario, about Boston starting off as almost an experiment in colonizing a small bay, right? Could have said that the early Boston was a startup. And the same thing with Seoul. Somebody found Seoul, and a long time ago compared to Boston.
Right.
So everything is a startup at one point, I guess. But innovation is where innovation again, and to something we talked about recently was as that innovation does not necessarily mean that it's something just mind-blowingly different. Innovation means you apply something maybe in a new way, something that already existed, and
Right.
And you bring it to market. That's like critical. You can't have innovation if you don't put it out there, because otherwise it's innovation without it being out there is a good idea.
Right.
That's it.
So I have one last question to finish up for today. So Hassan, you've been a little bit quiet. You haven't jumped in. So I'm gonna, Jose just talked a little bit about what happened in Boston, and he mentioned something. Government can be innovative. What would you say about the Korean government? Is the Korean government innovative, and do you feel that that it produces some kind of results? What do you think, Hassan?
Well, in case of business, I think there's they are innovative, but there's pros and cons.
What would be a pro? What would be a con?
So the way, I think they are very innovative and they want to deliver a lot of things. Then I think so Jose emphasizes that innovation has to deliver something, right? And the delivery, I think they're very good at it, but they tend to have so much regulations around it. That's the pros and cons, I think. So that drives a lot of differences very quickly, but that has some limits that the people that can generate more diversity or more ideas. So like you said, when we were trying to hold the event with the government, then we can have financial support, or they can bring up universities and other resources. But we have to have the saddest part is that we have the limit for the time. So whenever we started the networking, the conversation, the highlight of the event, then we had to stop at some time and like, hey, the time's up, you have to leave now. And it was like, we couldn't, it has less flexibility.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think what I clearly agree to parts where Hassan mentioned. I think like the push to the direction is very great, and the innovation is definitely there, but the existing processes and the hierarchies are not yet completely compatible with all the innovations going on. So you have like the KPIs for the government is sometimes not matched with supporting startup communities. Where so what will be a good outcome for like an event? For entrepreneurs, it's like meeting new people, but for reporting that into use of like the people's taxes, you have to say we brought in someone with a budget and we bought something for to support, you know, these startups. And definitely there goes in like the space. You have to pay for the space, but you can't go way overboard. Say, well, we're gonna rent 12 hours because people want to meet, and we can just casually, you know, do something. That's not gonna work. So I think definitely, like Mario mentioned, there's a drastic change. So I think it's definitely going in a good direction, very, very fast. But still, there is some, you know, distance between the existing process.
Right. So in summary, we've got one more slide, and this has been changing very dramatically. And now we're starting to see in Korea many more startup communities coming up. Some of them come with from companies like ours, who's a private company. They're starting to be created by universities. Definitely there's government participation. Seoul Startups, they're on the bottom left corner. That's definitely like a from the ground level type of startup community, focusing on, you know, the type of startup communities that Brad Feld talks about in his book. So I really like the events that they put on. And in closing, what I would like to do is we've got an interesting attendee in our audience today, Jihoon Yun, and I want to, you know, kind of close out the formal presentation and just invite him in and have a really quick chat. So Jihoon, we are promoting you to a panelist, which means that you will be able to turn on your video and your camera. Jihoon, are you there?
He's on mute right now.
Yeah, Jihoon, I can see that you're on mute. So I'm not sure how you're doing on your camera,
there we go.
but oh, there we go. Gotcha. Hi, Jihoon.
Okay, hi.
How are you?
Oh, hold on. Just, I'm gonna charge my laptop first.
Oh yeah, we don't want your laptop to run out of battery right now in the middle of the conversation. So thank you for joining us. It's our early morning show here in Seoul. We start at 8 a.m., which is 7 p.m. in Boston. So that lets us, you know, broadcast to both countries at the same time. How did you, Jihoon, how did you find out about our show today?
Oh, the newsletter. Thanks to the newsletter. So I registered this show through the newsletter that the Mario you sent me.
Okay, great. So what did you think about it?
I'm sorry. I just woke up just a few minutes ago. So
Okay, so you came in at the end of the show.
yeah, I'm so sorry.
Okay, that's a relief, because you were like, and I was like, oh no, he's gonna say it was terrible.
It's pretty early here.
It is early. We're gonna put the whole recording on, so you'll be able to you'll be able to go back and watch it. Jihoon, did you ever have a chance to meet Jose?
Just one time at the like
Event.
yeah we work.
Mm-hmm.
You were
Yep.
at the Adventures Week.
Yeah.
What have you been working on since then?
Sorry.
What have you been working on since that time? Are you now working for a startup? Are you?
Yeah, I'm just
working at-
studying. I'm senior now, so I have to graduate my school. So I have to get some certificate from the school, and I have to get some national certificate. So I'm studying now.
Okay, so when you say that you're a senior, that means you just started your senior year, or you just finished your senior year and you're just getting the certifications to move on to the real world?
Real world.
Yeah. So what's your plan after university?
Honestly, I want to go to the construction company.
Right.
So
Mhm.
actually, construction industry has a strict regulation in Korea, so I have to get some like yeah. As I told you, I have to get some national certificate. It's KISA certificate in Korea. So I'm studying. So, so I study all night. So
Oh no.
yeah, 10 days left. Next Sunday in Korea.
Hmm.
So I'm studying.
Whew. Wow.
Do you see, because you just mentioned that there's a lot of regulations in construction in Korea. I mean, I think
Yeah,
everywhere in the world there has to be a lot of regulations around construction, you
yeah, of
know?
course.
I think the two big reasons I can think of right now are like earthquakes and asbestos, right?
Mhm.
These are two good reasons why you want to have regulations in construction. Do
Yeah,
you see any entrepreneurs or any startup activity in the construction sector in Korea?
uh, yeah. Have you ever heard about Like Lion, the startup, the university student startup community based on coding, like
Oh,
computer.
Hmm.
How can I say the computer programming? I think.
Programming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I registered the Like Lion just a few months ago, and so I'm studying programming together in the community. So
Mhm.
that's the activity. Yeah, that's it.
Is this it?
Yeah,
So you registered and you're taking, so they do coding?
yeah. Yeah, I studying
They're like
coding.
they teach coding to each other.
So it's like peer learning?
Yes, and this is the
Hmm.
biggest one of the startup communities, or how is it, student community, and
Yeah,
become
yeah,
startup.
right.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Oh,
some
that's
big
great.
startup from like Lion is like Bank Salad, Talin, or like 자소설.com is from like Lion, based
Hmm.
on the programming.
Okay, and then what about construction? Do you see a direct link from what you're learning at Lion that you could apply to the construction industry?
Oh, it's not. It has less connection between the construction.
Oh, I think there's huge potential. Many many startups that I have been seeing out of MIT that relate to construction specifically, without programming, without AI, without machine vision, no, nothing. That's actually the core of the offering. So there are startups that are dealing with materials, with new materials, additives to construction to make concrete stronger, or to make certain to help some to use material, to recycle materials into construction materials. There's those which are kind of very kind of hands-on, very tangible products. But there's quite a few products that relate to, for example, Boston Dynamics, which has that robot. Like there's the cheetah, and then there's also like a human kind of looking humanoid robot. Well, the dog or leopard type of robot is used in construction sites to inspect every day, inspect all the work that's been done. And what it does, it uses machine vision to recognize the different parts of the construction site and compare it to the previous day's status. So you don't have to have a person walking around saying, okay, this was painted, this lights were installed. No, the robot just walks and just uses the camera, records everything, and it generates a report. And this is done automatically. Another one that I've seen has to do with cameras throughout the site to look at people and recognize if they are acting safely, if they are using their helmets, if they're using their goggles, if they're doing something where, let's say if there's a ladder. If there's a ladder, then you're supposed to have maybe like a warning sign around it or something, the different things you have to do to promote a safe environment. That is another construction related startup. And it's machine vision, machine learning, and it's purely a programming solution to the construction industry to reduce accidents in job sites. And lots of people interested in that. And in the inspection one, especially the insurance companies absolutely love it. And construction companies love it too, because if they can prove that they have a safe construction site, their insurance rates are lower. And insurance companies love to insure construction companies that are safe. So a lot of programming related innovations when it comes to construction.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because I think when we say the word construction and we think about startups, we're like, all right, so how do you start a construction firm? I mean, that's definitely hard, right? Because you're dealing with very large capital expenditures up front, a lot of capabilities building. I think most construction firms were probably started more as offshoots they were like spin-offs from the government, right? At a time when you needed to build new infrastructure. But definitely I think that was what Jose mentioned is a very interesting perspective, that services towards the construction sector have a lot of opportunity for innovation.
Yep.
The materials that you mentioned, there's a couple of startups that are in the program we're doing right now with the Swiss Embassy that are creating materials for construction. How do you make, one of them is making solidification of sands and dirt and marine foundations, and another one is recycling. A very interesting thing, recycling the rocks and the dirt that you get out of the excavation to make a new building. So apparently those, you just kind of haul them out and find a field, I guess, to dump them in. And what this company has developed is a process that you can recapture that and turn that stone and dirt and that has been injected into concrete that you can use, on site for the same construction. So there's that kind of interesting. Jihoon, I'll send you the link. You can take a look. We don't have a public website yet, do we, Semin? But we do have. I mean, we'll send you the link to the Science and Technology Office, and you can take a look at a couple of those material science companies. So those fall under the material science company side. And those could be interesting things for you to think about. And I don't know if they'd be looking for part-time workers to help them with their Korean expansion, but you can definitely reach out to them.
Okay, thank
and
you.
see if they're looking for someone. Actually, the CEO of one of them was just nominated to Forbes 30 under 30. Medusoil. It's the one that's doing the solidification of like dirt and sand in marine environments.
Okay, I'm
So
gonna
yeah,
take a look.
that's an idea there that could help you.
Yeah, and there's so many applications. I'll think of another one. Simple, very simple, but you would think, why didn't somebody think of this before? Well, probably didn't have the cheap enough technology. Using audio and other sensors in job sites, which are very simple, like dust sensors and maybe CO2 and others, to see if there are, like in many construction sites, you have hazardous materials. You have ammonia, you could have a big oxygen tank for, welding and other things that you're using. You can have a, if it's a pharmaceutical facility, of course, you're going to have all kinds of chemicals. And so it's just sensors deployed all over the place in case there's something happens. But also on the simplest level, microphones all over the place, because nowadays all cameras, also all surveillance cameras, which are pretty cheap now, They all have microphones. And now you add some sound processing to that. And you can determine if something happened at the website, at the site, based on the noise that was captured. So for example, an explosion, of course, could be captured very easily, but even somebody trying to break in can be, even in total darkness, you can hear something happen, and that can trigger an alarm to somebody. And these are all software-driven solutions with very simple off-the-shelf technology. You know, it's cameras and cheap cameras and
Right.
you know, so a lot of innovation in terms of managing the construction site. I know we had a discussion, you and I, about, you know, how to innovate in construction. You said it's very traditional. It's a very traditional field, and it takes a long time to change things. However, these technologies are not trying to change anything. If you think about it, they're not trying to change the way you build anything. They're not trying to change the materials that you use. They're not trying to change the approval process. All they're doing is adding an extra monitoring capability, which everybody likes. So in a very traditional industry, that traditional industry actually would like those kinds of solutions, because it's like, oh, you are watching over my site without changing anything about my site. You're just kind of providing a more intelligent way of supervising my construction site. You know, no laws needed for that. You know, no regulations needed to allow that to happen.
Right. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. So Jihoon, I really want to thank you for coming in and listening in and joining our little chat. Jose, Semen, Hassan, thanks a lot for the conversation this morning. So it was interesting. And I'll see everybody again next week. Jihoon, I'll send you a couple of links for you to look at later by email. So thanks a lot, everybody. Have a very good week, and we'll see you later.
Okay.
Mario.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.